On behalf of the International Institute of Natural Wellness Education, it is my privilege to welcome you to this lecture titled Understanding the Earth Element, Part 1. This is part of our series on five-element theory. For those that are unaware or unfamiliar with five-element theory comes from traditional Chinese medicine and is a way of looking at the body as a whole. It goes way beyond just physical aspects of the body, but helps us understand about personality, about differences, what motivates one person versus what motivates someone else. And so that's one of the reasons we make this particular class available for people to audit and view online, even those that are not a part of our Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition program, is that we find that out there's a lot of interest in our society on understanding each other, on things like on personality typing or things of that nature. Well, five-element theory goes way beyond most of what's out there when it comes to understanding each other. And so we're really honored to make these lectures available. We encourage you to go through them all and to take the time to learn them. My name is Dr. Hollis. I'm Executive Director here at the International Institute of Natural Wellness Education, and it's my privilege to present this lecture to you today. Before I do, I want to remind you that by proceeding, you agree to all of the terms listed herein, including that all information and statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, are not intended to diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure any disease, are for informational purposes only, and by proceeding, you agree not to attempt to apply any principle or practice outlined herein unless you are otherwise licensed to do so. Now, I want to make a point that that is not something I am just saying for legal purposes. In our society today, we seem to have an understanding that we should pay for a good education to get a good job, but on other areas, including wellness, we think that we should just be able to, with a few clicks of the mouse, get all the answers we need. And one of the things that is not understood, and I worry a great deal about, as do all the other professors that teach here for us at the Institute, is that people don't understand the fundamental difference in natural wellness. So before we proceed, I want to make sure you are aware of that. One of the common misconceptions out there that's been perpetuated by people faddishly trying to sell one product or another is that the main difference in natural wellness is that we take, as a naturopath or an herbalist or an iridologist or a traditional Chinese medical doctor, that we might just take a regular medical diagnosis and instead of applying a pharmaceutical or a drug or one of those methods, in turn, we might just apply an herb or a nutrient or a homeopathic. Well, this couldn't be farther from the truth, and you need to understand that it really comes down to a fundamental difference in the way that we're looking at imbalance in the body. I give great honor and respect to my brothers and sisters in medicine that have devoted their life to learn medical procedures, and what they do for emergency medicine is phenomenal. But they are going to be trained to look at things differently than I am. And in a medical scenario, what they do is look at a group of symptoms and then come up with a drug or a surgery or some sort of procedure that can mitigate that group of symptoms. And be that a growth or discomfort or whatever it is, get rid of that. And there's times when that's very, very important. But from a natural medicine standpoint, what we are looking at is the origin. What started this imbalance and how can we nourish the body so that it can correct the problem that it started with? The reason I want you to understand this is for those that are just on here listening, inevitably we get inundated with questions of people that are just saying, okay, I loved your lectures, now I have this symptom, what do I do? You need to understand that's not our purpose here. We cannot in post, we cannot by email or by phone just answer quick medical questions. Nothing we provide here is a substitute for medical advice. We're trying to give you a different way of looking at the body so you can learn to balance and nourish the body. Now we do periodically, just so you understand, this is an audited course that's part of our full Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition program. So, essentially you're coming in and sitting in the back of the lecture lecture hall, and we're giving you an opportunity to see the type of things we teach. We're glad to do that, but we encourage you to visit us online at knowyourwellness.org. Call us at 208-899-2712. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and join us on Facebook, so as we make more lectures freely available, you can enjoy those. And when the time is right for you to take an education in natural medicine more seriously, we hope you consider us. But whether it's us or some other program out there, please take seriously going through a real program, a formal program to understand natural wellness. It's far too common for people to read a magazine article or a book and think that they can address medical problems when they don't have a fundamental understanding of the body. So whether it's our program or any other good programs from Dr. Christopher or Stephen Horn or Westbrook or Trinity or dozens of other good programs out there that are very reasonable priced that you're able to do at a distance and online, please just consider a program. And when you're doing that, visit us online at knowyourwellness.org. So, with that said, we've covered all our legal grounds. Let's jump right into the fun of what we're here for today, and that is 5-element theory. Now, before I begin, I want to make sure that everyone on here are students, for those of you, and I'll be addressing our Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition students. And as you know, 5-element theory is a way of looking at the body as a whole. And that's one of the things that I want to be really clear on, is that if we were to take every part of who you are, your physiology, different emotional traits, different biological perspectives, and we were to group each of those into 5 categories, that's what 5-element theory comes down to. It comes from thousands of years of history in traditional Chinese medicine, and it's one of the fascinating things that we see spanning the globe in all facets of traditional healing. There are similar methods of thinking and philosophies in Native American culture and their traditional healing, in Ayurvedic cultures coming out of India, Maori cultures, all across the world. They've looked at the body in 5 parts. We use traditional Chinese medicine because it has the most research and is probably most finalized from any of the systems we've looked at. But really what we want to give you is that way of looking at the body as a whole. Now, when we do that, I want to be real clear. One of the things that gets people confused is the term energy. I'll often refer to, in this case, we'll be talking about earth, so I might say something like earth energy. Now, some of you in natural wellness have been around types and modalities of healing that talk a lot about energy work. There's a lot of different modalities that talk about things like grounding and pulling in energy from the earth. I want to be crystal clear that that's not what I'm referring to here. When I say earth energy, I'm referring to the function of all of those systems and portions of your body that are part of the earth element. Okay, all these right here. So I'm not saying when I say an increase in earth energy that you're pulling in energy from the earth or anything like that. I'm just saying the biological processes that make up this system might be increased. They might be overreacting or under. If I say not enough earth energy, it might be that they're underactive. So that's what we're talking about, because everything in natural medicine is about homeostasis or balance. So we're always looking to achieve a balance. And so that's an important thing that you need to be aware of. Now we're going to be talking about 2 things. Let me toggle over here. You should have in front of you, you should have your 5-element charts, your handouts from all of the 5 different just the element that we'll be working with today. So we don't need all of them. You just need, in this case, the earth element for this lecture, and then your 5-element chart, and then, of course, something to take notes on. So as we go through this, I want to be clear. There's 2 things we look at when we're dealing with the earth energy. Oh, one other thing that, just so you understand, the reason we call them wood, fire, earth, water, metal, is simply so that you understand how they interact with each other. You don't have to explain to somebody that fire burns up wood or water puts out fire. Those are things that we understand innately. So that's why we use those elements to help us understand what's going on. So as we toggle back here to the earth element, what we'll be talking about is 2 things. We all have all 5 elements in our body. I mean, I have all the biological parts. I have the personality traits. People can be, they have within them all the emotions. But everybody has a dominant element. It's part of who you are. It's part of the way you were born. It's just a dominant element within you. And so a lot of what we'll be discussing today is how to identify that dominant element, because that's where it becomes really valuable as you work with other people, that you can recognize this is a fire person. I know the type of things that will motivate this fire person and how to help them, and ways to present things that will be more comfortable to them, and so on with each of the elements. So you start to learn how to identify and recognize, and you also start to understand yourself more perfectly. A lot of people go through life fighting themselves because they think they should be a certain way or fit a certain mold. And there's a lot of freedom that comes in understanding who you are, and recognizing that, okay, it's okay for me to be that. This is my personality, that's my physiology, that's who I am. And so that's why we are going to talk in these lectures a lot about your assessing a dominant element. So we'll be talking about a lot about those that have a dominant earth energy. But with that, we're also going to talk about balancing. So you can see on our chart here, I've went ahead and highlighted in blue all the things that relate to a dominant element. So this whole category right here is all dominant element related. Now underneath that, under emotions, the bottom 2, fear, archetype, and spirit, those are for a dominant element. But this upper 3, deficiency, balance, and excess, that can be for anyone. I'm a fire element, so even as a fire element, I might go through an experience in life, a physiology reaction, trauma, an emotional situation, whatever the case may be, that causes me to be out of balance in the earth energy, okay? And as such, I need to know what to look for when I'm deficient or in excess of those energies. So we will secondarily be talking about how to achieve balance, and that's for anybody. The balancing things that we talk about down here at the bottom, that's for anybody that's wanting to balance earth energy, regardless of whether you're a dominant element or not. And then, of course, this one right here, this is all for, the one that's highlighted here is all for people that are dominant elements. So let's go right up here and jump right into it. The first 2 are face and features. Now we have a whole lecture on face analysis for identifying dominant element types. So we're not going to talk in-depthly about that. When you get further into the program and go through that lecture, that'll make more sense. But I want you to first understand the elements, then you can understand how do I recognize it in face shape and body style and those things. But before I do, I want to make sure that you're very aware. There's a lot of easy ways that people would say out there to assess what your dominant element is. There's quick quizzes you can do online, and a lot of times those are very useful. Face analysis, as we teach, is really useful. However, there's always exceptions. Another one that I've heard people do is based on when you were born, the time of year you were born, and they have a tie to that means you're a certain element. All of those things may have merit, so use them as you would like, but please do not solely depend on any of them. If you want to use a nice online quick questionnaire, sure. But once that questionnaire is filled out and scored, then you're going to go back, and based on what you understand on earth element that we're talking about here, you're going to make sure that truly is the dominant element for that person. So thick face and jowls is the face features. Now jowls, misunderstanding, a lot of times we think of jowls, we think of under the chin. This is actually the sides of the lower jawbone. Fleshy nose and ears, wide mouth. Fire and earth are the 2 that most commonly, if someone smiles big, you'll see the corners of their mouth will be outside of the vertical pupil line. And what I mean is, if you were to drop a line straight down vertically from the center of your pupil, oftentimes it's earth and fire elements that have mouths or smiles that go outside of that line, lateral on either side. So that's another thing. Thick eyebrows is actually quite common. Both of those are probably pretty dominant features I would watch for. Thick eyebrows, very, very common. Thick body may or may not. Now mannerisms. Deep voice. Boy, this one right here. Deep voice is common, but I don't rely on it. But boy, this one is common. The ability to be still. Earth elements, it fits. Earth, you think of Earth, it's still. It doesn't move. Compare it to fire or water that are all over the place. Earth has the ability to be still. A solid base in life. That's another really common one. They like stability. And that's okay. We need all kinds. You just need to understand that if you're an earth element or working with those or, living with those that are, gathering, saving, and storing, that's just going to be second nature to them. And it might drive waters and fires crazy, but that's what they do. They save and store. If there was, when we look at energy here, if there was one thing that I could say, wow, that's Earth all the way, it would be a traditional ways of doing things. My goodness, is this important to them? They need to know there's a traditional way, and innovation is not as common, not what they're known for and moving, but rather knowing that there's just a way you do things, and that's just how you do it, the traditional way. And so again, sometimes that's hard for people to understand. Now, pathology, and again, we're not saying, I want to be really clear, we're not saying that people will or are having problems with these, but if you're working with a client as a master herbalist and advanced nutrition consultant, you know that if they're a dominant earth element, one thing you're always going to be aware of is that based on what organ systems are a part of that, as you can see right here, based on what organ systems are a part of that earth element, you're going to keep an eye on it. Digestion and assimilation issues, very common, deals with stomach. Now, spleen disorders, which we often be manifest in autoimmune or immune problems, because in traditional Chinese medicine, spleen has a lot of a tied to immune response. Those are going to be common. Sinus problems. Now, this is kind of an interesting one that you should understand from some of the digestion lectures that we've talked about, but I want to recover, is that the mucosal membrane that lines the stomach, the small intestines, that prevents any damage and erosion from the acidity, actually is a continuous mucosal membrane that starts in your sinuses and goes all the way down to the sigmoid colon before your body, your rectum. And so that same membrane actually goes all, down the back of your throat, your esophagus. And so sometimes people that are having an imbalance in the digestive phases will show up as chronic running stuffy nose, a lot of mucus that could result in something like sinusitis, which is just an inflammation of the sinus areas, because that mucus that's constantly present is a perfect environment for bacteria, fungus, viruses, things, mold to grow. And so it results in that, but the actual root cause can be this excess mucus that is tied to the digestive imbalance, and your body's producing excess mucus to try to coat the stomach lining because of an acid imbalance. So, one of those things to really consider as you're doing it. Eating disorders, and again, because the mouth's involved, eating disorders, not just digestive, but it's not uncommon to keep an eye out on eating disorders in way of emotional-based eating disorders, uncontrolled eatings and addictions related to eating disorders. Again, that means just somebody that has that doesn't mean they're an earth element, but I never look at it that way. I never ever have someone that comes in with digestive problems and say, oh, they must be an earth element. It's always used the other direction. Once we know what their dominant element is, what their personality is, then we're just going to keep an eye on those things. We're just going to know that we want to monitor those. So in this case, you'd want to look at the enzyme processes of the body. Because of the pancreas tie, both in blood sugar handling and the way our body metabolizes sugar, and the pancreas's response in digestive processes and in enzymes for digestive processes. Also, because of the stomach, I'm going to look specifically at stomach acid. And so that can go one of two ways. It may be that I'm causing them and encouraging them, or not causing them, I'm recommending that my client eats with every meal, eats something that is properly and traditionally fermented, like apple cider vinegar or fermented pickles or vegetables, and we have a lot of good videos on how to do that available online. And that will trigger the release of acid and trigger that acid to be released from the cells and proton pumps that are normally responsible for that. Or in some cases, there may be a deficiency to the point that someone has to supplement acidity by taking something that has betaine hydrochloride in it. Either way, you just want to watch that. Now there are virtues and faults. Again, they can be either. It's just part of who they are. Faithfulness, caring, boy, underline faithful. For any of you that are listening to this, that as you're reading along, you're thinking, I am married to a earth element, underline that 3 times for me. They are caring and compassionate, but faithfulness is so important to them. On the other side of the scale would be manipulative and interfering. Because faithfulness is so important, sometimes they can interfere in others to, want to know if things are being faithfully handled. So, as we scroll down here, let's go ahead and skip to the bottom part of the emotions where we talk about fear. Poverty, change, upheaval. Of all of these, poverty is a real common one, but I would say of these, that the biggest one is going to be change. Change is really, as I mentioned, if you think about a big mountain, an earth, it's difficult for change. And so when we're understanding earth elements, change is not something that happens easily or lightly. So especially for airs or not airs, excuse me, for waters that have that ability so ineptly, you need to understand that you cannot expect that so easily with an earth element. Give them time for change. Peacemaker is an apt word here. They're very much peacemakers, intellect, very intellectual people. Think through things a lot. Sometimes that serves them, sometimes too much. Sometimes it's hard to act because they're so intellectual. So either way you look at that. Now as we scroll down further here, let's talk about the ways and things to understanding an earth element. Insist upon loyalty, security, and predictability. Now I've said this before, but I'm going to tell you to go ahead and circle that one right there, because you just really want to be careful with that for your benefit and for theirs. As you have clients, understand that you need to be very loyal to their wishes, to the things they ask you. And that doesn't going to apply as a master herbalist as much, because you're always going to be loyal to requests made by clients. However, for those that are, the people, your friends, family, be just very cautious. Insisting upon loyalty and the traditional ways of doing things is really, really earth dominant. They want to be involved and needed. Really important to them. Involved and needed. Don't overlook that. Give them a responsibility. They can handle it. They're intellectual. They can handle taking care of things. They're often, because of that ability to be still, because of the predictability element that they desire, and they don't look for change, oftentimes you'll see them in jobs that to other elements might seem mundane, but to them it's very satisfying, because it's a job that's very predictable and reliable. It's something that is needed, because it's an important piece, be it finance or when it's something like accounting, something that is very needed but is also very stable and secure and predictable, and that they can be loyal to. They make great employees in that case, because they're very loyal and reliable. This 5-element theory in China, during some of the rules, the communist rules in China, this was how they assessed jobs for people, as they outlined what element they were, and if you were an earth element or a water element, that was the jobs that were open to you. And these were the ones that had the standard, the jobs that, like I said, don't change a lot. They like to be in charge, very much so, because they're good, because they're responsible. They like to be in charge. Stability, grounding, nourishing, caring, concerning for others, creative, midwife for others, transitions. This is a really important one, and let me explain what I mean by being a midwife to others' transitions. We say they don't like change. They don't like change commonly. That element type doesn't like change, but they're very willing to help change in others. As water changes, it runs across the ground. As a fire changes and moves, it moves across the ground. As a forest grows from one spot to another, it's going across the ground. So oftentimes these are the friends that help others with their changes because they're good listeners, they're stable, sound, secure. They're able to help others in transition, even though personally they don't like transition as much themselves, but they can see it more clearly for others. So, you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just be aware. They seek harmony. We skipped that one. I don't want to skip that one. Seeks harmony and togetherness. So don't misunderstand the stability factor with their loners. They're not loners by any means. They like, together time, but it needs to be in harmony. That's where the stability comes in. They're peacemaker, harmony. But they do like being together with family and loved ones. And that is an important part of them. Accepting and agreeable. I think, or accommodating, not accepting, excuse me. The accommodating part also ties into why they often facilitate change in others, or as we put it here, they're a midwife to others' transitions. So now let's skip. So that kind of covers our understanding. Let's talk about how to balance. So we've talked about kind of what it's like to be the goods and the bads and what it's like to be an earth element. Balancing. Now this again goes regardless of whether you are earth element or not. Just everyone has within them earth elements. So what if you're a water, but one day the earth element just gets really out of balance? Well, you'll find that you don't have, you'll notice that in the same ways. You don't have the ability to stay in one thing. You really are frustrated doing the same thing day in and day out. You really want, you don't have that ability to stay still and be solid. All of those things are indicative of a deficiency, meaning you don't have enough earth energy. And so the other energies are overpowering. Now, if you're not a dominant earth energy, you still want to recognize you're probably never going to have as much earth energy as someone that's dominantly that. You can't really change your own personality. But if you're in a situation, all of us at times need to be stable and need to be grounded. All of us at times need to do things that may seem mundane to others. So if you're in those situations and you're really just, it's not working, you don't feel it, then you need to start looking at if possibly your own earth energy is out of balance. Now, when they're in balance, like I've said, integrity, empathy, thoughtfulness, secure in self, they're pretty confident and secure people. But when it's out of balance, it depends on which way it goes. If you've been put in what you would consider a dead-end job and you're being asked to do the same thing over and over every day and you run out of that energy, what'll happen is it'll start to manifest in neediness and you'll feel very draining to yourself and to others. A martyr's a big one. If I had to understand it, it's kind of the woe is me, my life is so horrible. Look at my dead-end job. You really become a martyr. That's going to be hard to read the others. I'll just underline that, but that's an important one for you. Boredom. Nothing is useful in life, or you just feel really bored. Bottomless hole, stuck. Stuck's a very another apt word. So when you start feeling these things, regardless of what element you are, you may look if because of your circumstance, or it can be triggered by biological processes. So it isn't just lifestyle circumstances. Maybe certain organ systems have gone out of balance, and as a result of those organ systems being out of balance, it's triggered those emotions within you. Remember, we don't separate in natural medicine between the psyche and the body. We believe that it's impossible to separate those, and you're always connected. So every illness has emotional components, and every emotion has physical components. It's all one. So we try to look at it as a whole. So now on the other side, maybe you don't have enough stability. Maybe you don't have, or these functions of your body are overacting. Too much action. What you'll see manifest is you'll start to see an excess of earth energy. Okay, that's going to be an excess. Now, the excess is going to be in obsessive, excess self-sufficiency, where you have to save everything and it almost becomes pathological. Because why? Because you have this earth energy that wants to be stable and secure. And in your current situation, you don't feel stable and secure. So you don't have anywhere for that energy to be expressed. And so you almost become obsessive in saving and being self-reliant and self-sufficient, overbearing. You start listening to others because that's how it's manifest. Reluctant to change, really difficult there. Mothering. So you can see that instead of just going, why am I this way? You start to go, maybe it's that I have this excess of earth energy. So how can I bring that into balance? That's where we go down here. So in balancing it, we're going to start with the healing reactions, gardening, getting in touch with, the growing, and gardening is really important. Making bread. Now, it's not, I'm not saying flour is what's healthy for this. This isn't under the food thing. But do you remember the traditional ways of doing things that we talked about? Making bread is a good example of that for our discussion here today. But doing some traditional things, going, being with good company, not going out and meeting new people as much. And not that you can't, but remember, it's all about tradition and the way things. So catching up with old friends, spending a quiet evening, being involved in something bigger than yourself, where that ability to plan and organize and be stable really becomes important. Relaxing. Aerobic exercise is really useful in this, and it ties into the outlet for that excess energy through the lungs or through the aerobic activity. So that's why it becomes really a useful tool for balancing. So aerobic exercise, I would say for sure, but the aerobic is the important, not the weightlifting. Now, breakfast is important, but just like when we talked with fire elements, that it was important for them to go to bed early, but it's very difficult. You'll find, especially when it's out of balance, that even though breakfast is important, it becomes something that earth elements commonly don't do. They're the breakfast skippers. They avoid and the things they end up doing because they become so run down, their adrenal glands are shot because they haven't been eating. Then they compensate for it eating late at night, which then the next morning they have because of digestive imbalance. The food's still there, food that should have left their stomach within 60 to 90 minutes at the max. So it's still there. So they just don't feel like eating, so they don't. So those are two things to watch for. Now, foods that are really good are going to be your rices, brown rices and quinoas and barley. Naturally sweet vegetables like carrots, parsnips, turnips, squash, orchard fruit like red apples and pears, warm spices such as ginger. Now, you think of that in traditional or Western herbology. This is all Chinese medicine, but Western herbology, ginger is one of the most common things that we talk about for stomach imbalance, for nourishing and strengthening the stomach. So you start to see the logical crossover. Things like, where was I? So garlic's another one, cardamom, again, things that we would normally see for nourishing the stomach are also listed here, and foods to eat and build. Now, foods to avoid, processed sugars. I don't need to explain why. It deals with the sugar handling that takes place with pancreatic function. Tropical fruits like bananas and mangoes, fruit juice. Now, fruit juice is something that we often, when we're talking about blood sugar handling, we often talk about fruit juice because you've got to understand fruit juice is very concentrated. We weren't meant to drink a huge amount of fruit juice. We were meant to eat an orange or an apple, and that's why we want to be careful with fruit juices. Cold fluids, dairy, remember I was talking about mucus? and how dairy is such a common trigger, and wheat and white bread, such common triggers for increased mucus. So all of those right there are really going to be important ones for us. Fruit juice, I mean, really watch those things and help them by giving them other options to do. Now, one that's not on here, go ahead and write it in. I noticed on the foods to build would be raw vegetables or lightly steamed vegetables, mainly because we want to give the body an increase in available enzymes. As you know, the body has over 200,000 types of enzymes. There is not a biological process that doesn't take place without an enzyme. And those, most of which are converted from raw plant-based enzymes into a isolated enzyme a moment before they're needed. And so eating those raw fruits and vegetables gives the excess availability of enzymes that can be converted for other biological processes, specifically right here in your spleen and your pancreas. So, add that in there. Raw fruits and vegetables are going to be useful suggestions for somebody in this circumstance. So I hope this gives you some idea on our, and stay tuned with us for part 2, where we're going to talk a little more about body function. This kind of gave you some personality and understanding. So with part 2, stick with us. We'll jump into that. But as always, thank you for being a part of this lecture, and visit us online at knowyourwellness.org.